Hey guys, so today I wanted to cover the T1 versus TL game a little while back at the Esports World Cup, specifically this absolute banger Zeri top in game 2 of the series against TL. So for context here, TL actually wins game 1 of this series with a very TL sort of draft, let's put it that way. Like we see the unconventional Azir counter, so T1 bans both sides of Corki Trist because they're down to play FTB, sort of control mage, and as a response, TL ends up playing the Ziggs. But in this video, I wanted to cover mainly game 2, where T1 makes a little bit of an adjustment and they force the draft in a different direction in order to gain a huge advantage on top side, and just kind of break down why it's actually pretty good. And it might not be for the reasons that you might think. So I want to start with the draft and why we got to this position in the first place, because anything could look good with the right setup. And that's basically the main goal of having a banger draft, and that's why it's such an important phase actually, because players, they're at really high levels, even though like the margins between them mechanically and then certain specific things, like it's not going to be as high, let's say, as like your average sort of gameplay, right? So draft becomes a bigger factor because that is the most manipulable factor outside of the game, and setting your players up for success is going to be a very important piece of that. So specifically in this draft, I would say the bans are nothing too crazy. There is a T1 ban of the Jax as a response, and in this case, in contrast to game 1, keep in mind that both sides of the Corki Trist matchup are available, and TL respond in kind by picking the Corki. So T1 taking Sejuani priority here on B1 is both good because it's a high priority jungler that can do a lot, as well as one that basically reveals nothing about your comps, because Sejuani is just pretty flexible, can do whatever she wants in most directions. So TL respond in kind, Corki Ezreal been very common because these two pieces basically just establish your poke comp straight up. T1, they basically automatically take the Tristana side of the matchup, which they're usually down for. It's totally fine. Figures down to play both sides, and then this is where the Zeri comes up. At first glance, you don't think this is Zeri top. That's what you have to keep in mind here. And with this, T1 are always keeping TL on their toes. I'd say like in a vacuum, TL did not necessarily draft poorly per se. It's actually like a pretty solid draft because of their ability to take a lot of priority picks right now. They set themselves up for this Corki Ezreal draft. It was just really, really off guard from T1 to be able to gain so much advantage in an unconventional way. And that's what I want to challenge in this video. So bans come out a little bit more. A lot of topside bans, obviously, because both laners have, they haven't quote unquote picked top, and TL picked Cassandra on 4, which is like, it's proper. Like it's very safe. You want to save your jungle for 5, so that's totally chill, right? And we're in a meta where there's a lot of full clear junglers right now, and there's a lot of viability there. In hindsight, you could argue that jungle, like if you think about how many available junglers there are right now, they're all decently similar stylistically, so you arguably could have saved top for 5 here and just play it safe that way. But it is hard to say. It's a trade-off that teams are willing to make. Sometimes R5 jungle makes sense, but this is where T1 switch it up. They commit their all-in with Caitlyn Braum. So this basically gets them a second chance to switch up the bot lane matchup, which is actually excellent in this case, because this turns like the arguably losing sort of bot side matchup into the Ezreal Leona into one that's just strictly winning. And it basically produces bot side priority out of thin air. And this is the crazy part, because not only is all of a sudden T1 has 3 winning lanes, and it turns a draft where it looked pretty solid for TL, but T1 manages to find a way to punish that off of a Cassandra R4, which is like very, very impressive, considering Cassandra R4 is not even a bad pick by any means. It's just it is a champion that most teams are coming up with the most creative sort of picks against. It comes off the same. Zeri top against Cassandra is like the offhand cousin of Vayne top and TF top. It's just a different sort of style, and the main benefit in this case is being able to pick a normal AD carry that actually goes bottom lane and then just put a top lane. And you can kind of see this reflected in the gameplay a little bit, because on paper, TL's comp is actually really solid. Like directionally, they have a poke comp that has a lot of CC and peel, and as long as they're lane stabilized and they do fairly well in the early bits of the game, then, you know, it's going to be pretty hard directionally for T1 to actually go into this team. You know, this Core JJ can make a lot of space. They don't have the tools to really stop this poke if this poke comp were to go well. So it's not even on paper that bad of a draft. The problem is it is contingent on the fact that they get advantage. And I just mentioned that T1 have 3 winning lanes. So how are you going to get that advantage when you're against Caitlyn, you're against Tristana? Like, whatever objective you try to get and try to get your advantage in order to make your poke useful, T1 are basically there to actually stop it. And you can kind of see this the entire time. The way I'd like to put it is, like, it doesn't really matter what your comp is if you're like really behind. And it sounds really obvious, but this is not something that you would think at first glance when you see these two comps go against each other. And it's just because of how bad this top lane matchup is, right? It's pretty much unplayable for Impact the entire game. It's especially unplayable in the first, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, because there is no way that Impact is able to do anything against someone that can space Cassante as much as a champion like Zeri can, right? And that's why a lot of these AD carry picks have been coming out, range top abuse, yada yada yada, and it's been pretty funny. And because of that, this cancer has been coming up, and it's pretty funny how this T1 piloted, and I think it's been actually very useful. So it starts off with a really strong advantage on top side. They have Sejuani can basically do whatever she wants, and the whole team can do whatever they want, and it just develops this increasing advantage. And when you're playing a comp like TL's, you need to be ahead for your poke to actually deal damage, and if you're not, then it's just not going to be that useful. And you can kind of see it here. Even in lane, you know, they try to get pressure, but they really can't because it's just Caitlyn. And you know, if your Ezreal's not ahead, if your Corki's not ahead, you know, there's not much that you can really do here. So we can see the outcome here by, let's say, towards late game. You can see sort of like the output of what happens. So the result of 3 winning lanes is gold advantage everywhere. You can see Zeri is up an entire item on the Cassante, and this was off the back of a decent early game of, you know, owner giving some pressure towards him and setting himself up for success. But at the same time, it's like, sure, let's say, sure, your comp is a little bit worse on paper, but you know, what if Zeri got a free boost, 3,000 gold? You know, what if she was that much stronger? Basically, that's what the difference is here. You know, it's not, oh, it's just a Zeri comp front to back against a poke comp. It's a Zeri comp that it's a Zeri champ that managed to get a giant advantage for free, so it completely changes the identity here. So, you know, that is something to, that's like another way to reframe this, and that's why basically this draft was way better. And then people might realize it might look like an ego draft at first, because it's like, yeah, Zeus is probably like, yeah, I can take Zeri here, guys, it's fine. But actually, it's really smart. And I just want to point out why the logic behind it was the resources it got in draft, and why the flexibility of players like this is the sole reason why they managed to get such an advantage in draft. It turned basically an okay draft into one with a lot of winning lanes and a lot of advantage everywhere, and a team like T1 can just basically take it home from there. And that was basically the idea here. So I wanted to basically just use this video as an idea to kind of explain and note how cool a draft like this is, and you know, how it kind of functions. And hopefully this was insightful to you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. So yeah.